here we are. The moment of your death. The moment of your final reckoning. And I am he, I am the Grim Reaper. I am he who comes to kill. So please know, Tom, that you die not as a hero, nor really a villain. Just a very, very disappointing NPC. It's a real shame, Tom. You seem like a cool guy. Go well to your grave, Tom. Die poorly, just like you lived.
Starlight, say goodnight. Starbright.
Tom, this is how you end. Not with a whimper, not with a bang. You were so filled with your own self-importance that you didn't think to question that maybe you might actually die, and here we are. Final Fantasy 16 could have been something special. I'd have loved to hear your thoughts. Alas, not to be.
Sometimes things take longer than you think they would. Happens a lot in the video game industry. I think most people would say the video game industry is not in the best place right now. Most video game companies are not in the best place right now. And Square Enix, certainly not perfect, but you know what? They're one of the few big companies out there still trying to put out real games. I'm talking about pure single-player adventures that are more than just the same copy and pasted overworld you've played a bunch of times. Games helmed by creative directors, designers, storytellers, like crafted by people with a passion for the medium. There's just less and less of that going around these days. They delve into the cynical side of the industry, certainly, with other spin-off titles, mobile games and stuff, but they still make room for their bread and butter, and they still take pride in serving it to us. They have provided more quality to the PlayStation 5 exclusive library than the company that makes the PlayStation 5. And they're hurting for it. That's why recently they announced their plans to stop working directly with Sony to provide exclusive Final Fantasy games and focus aggressively on multi-platform, marking the end of a relationship that goes back to Final Fantasy VII. Well, 15 launched on Xbox same day, but we all know that that one's a black sheep. Final Fantasy 15 was a roller coaster that ended with its reputation being mostly sad and disappointing. It took a lot of risks that most players did not agree with, and I'm not going to be the first person to notice that everything about the next mainline title's development, structure, and philosophy seemed like an intentional departure from everything 15 did. Final Fantasy XVI released exclusively for the PlayStation 5 in the summer of 2023, with no anime tie-in, no feature film adaptation, no planned DLC, no mobile game, not even a book filled with character backstories or anything, just the game. A finished game that didn't need a bunch of patches later to fix things, although they still did some. Being a Final Fantasy focused channel, I was suffering some major FOMO when I missed this game's hype window when it came out a year ago, and I was busy reading Final Fantasy VII on the way to a smile or some shit. But with this generation of video games, Even when something's finished on launch, it always pays to be late. Because 16 did end up getting 2 DLC packs and a couple of patches that polished up the game's quality of life and addressed fan complaints. So I got to play the best version of the game. And this team knows a thing or two about listening to fans. Yes, as if it were a reward for consistent good behavior or something, the team behind the critically acclaimed MMO Final Fantasy XIV were put on a single-player mainline, which they developed alongside 14 as the directors Yoshi P and Naoki Yoshida passed notes between each other. Being a 14 player will definitely change your perception of the 16 player experience. It's made impressively in the same engine. There's lots of impressive things about this game, and there's many other positive traits to write home about. But it's been almost a year, and the internet is still very divided on Final Fantasy XVI. What is wrong with it, though? On the surface, literally nothing, and I kept my eyes away from any discussion about the game as best I could in these last few months. But there was one thing shouted enough for me to still hear it. The accusation that Final Fantasy XVI is not Final Fantasy enough. A complaint as meaningless as saying this particular type of pasta is not pasta enough. It doesn't taste like buttered pastina my mom made me when I was 8 years old. Final Fantasy is the pasta of video games. You can shape it in hundreds of different ways, dress it in all kinds of sauce, add it to main servings of literally any kind of protein, but it's still pasta. Final Fantasy games, especially the ones beyond the Super Nintendo, are united by not much outside of cheeky referential names and common creatures. This isn't a first for 16. When somebody complains about an entry not feeling enough like they think it should feel, to me, that just exposes their fundamental misunderstanding of what this is. I'd bet money those people haven't actually played all the main lines themselves. I'm not going to spend any more time arguing on this point. I know that Final Fantasy XVI is a Final Fantasy game because it has Final Fantasy in the title. There are much more nuanced reasons why a lot of fans feel a little lukewarm on this one. It's much harder to put into words than it was for the people who disliked 15, but that's what this video's for. And I don't mean to lead into this so negatively, it's just my observation of the community. There are also plenty of people who adore this one for other reasons we'll discuss, and make no mistake, this is a great game that rightfully earns its place among the other mainlines. But we gotta dissect it today. We will dissect it fully, but I'm also making this video spoiler friendly as best I can. I know that the game is just a year old and many are waiting on the PC version, so here's what we'll do. As usual, this video is separated by YouTube chapters seen below on the video player line and in the description. Each chapter is a topic we'll discuss spoiler-free in the beginning, and then we'll talk about stuff that might be considered spoilers after a certain point. These can be story-related or mechanic-related or anything. You will be warned. And if it's something you don't care to see, you can simply jump to the start of the next chapter and continue watching without spoilers. I call this ATS, or active time spoiling. When we enter the active time spoil part of the chapter, feel free to skip to the next one. So, why don't we start by discussing spoiler-free story basics, just the general introduction to the world of Final Fantasy XVI. Other mainlines might use books or audio dramas to flesh out their world, but 16 probably takes the cake for most lore present in the game. Dense is the history of the twin continents of Valisthea, a world governed by the 6 nations united under the legendary crystals that bestow magic powers to special chosen ones. Each crystal stands for a specific element and its equivalent godlike icon, aka the classic summons Ifrit, Shiva, Titan, and so on. I mean, does this not sound like a Final Fantasy game to you? There are some twists to the tradition as always. The big one here is that super special chosen ones are chosen to become dominants for the Eikons. So instead of just having fire powers, you can be blessed with the ability to call upon Ifrit himself, and therefore won't be threatened by anyone else, save for the other dominants. Our main guy, Clive Rossfield of the nation Rosaria, is tasked with being the guard of his younger brother Joshua, the dominant of Phoenix. He's a young lad just getting hold of his powers, so he's not a threat to anyone yet. It's the other way around. Tons of people could want to rob the nation of that tremendous power by trying to kill the boy before he figures it out. Clive is also a bearer, one of the chosen who can use magic, but not as well as his dominant brother, not nearly as much. He can just flick some flames out of his fingers a little bit. His mom is a horrible, evil person who coddles Joshua, completely favorites him because of his powers, and treats Clive like trash for their differences. And she's not alone. A central conflict of the main story is about the persecution of bearers across the land. They are essentially slaves. Most nations put newborn babies through tests to see if they're gifted with magic. If so, they are no longer considered human from that point on and will be put to a life of labor. Some nations will even kill the baby as soon as they find out because they see bearers as unholy abominations. They are the same as everyone else except the magic part, yet they are considered tools to be used rather than living beings. All of them get branded with this black symbol you see on Clive's face so that everyone else knows to be racist towards them, basically. The only bearers and dominants who live somewhat comfortably are those born into royalty, like Clive, even though everyone hates him, or those who escaped their conditions and went into hiding. And I know what you might be thinking. This is a question many have brought up, and it'll probably cross your mind while playing. How come the ones with the superpowers are the ones oppressed? Can't they just set you on fire or something? A very reasonable concern, but it goes much deeper than that. The bearers are not that strong. Being able to use fire doesn't mean you can just cast Firaga and torch a city if you feel like it. They can do pretty basic things, just enough to be a valuable tool to keep the town running and to be traded to other nations for a decent price. They're also immediately cast out from the rest of people at birth. The oppression is something they're indoctrinated with. Their entire lives are spent with an understanding that this is just how it is. This is who I am. I am lesser than everyone else. And most of them can't even use their powers without holding a crystal shard. This is another important piece of the culture and economy as crystals become harder to get over time. Bearers basically draw their powers from the shards and use them up like batteries, so the guards of all these nations make sure to only provide the crystals when it's time for them to do the job and then take them away. Yes, technically, a fire bearer could burn the face off of the guard watching him or something, but it would not take long for some others to come over and kill him immediately without a second thought. I for one thought this concept was an interesting way to talk about oppression because they can't even use the excuse of those people look different than us, therefore we treat them differently. Some bearers get away with not receiving the brand or even painfully removing it, and they're able to live amongst the people perfectly fine. It's almost like oppression doesn't happen for any reason in particular, it simply exists from humanity's desire to hold power over themselves. You'll find this story hitting a little closer to home than the average Final Fantasy fairy tale. It was Yoshi P's intent to finally bring adult-themed dark fantasy to the series. Probably another big reason why those claim it doesn't feel enough like a Final Fantasy game. This is our first mainline M-rated title, but our third overall. Type 0 gave us an M-rated anime. There was blood and disturbing imagery, but it was mostly fantastical. Stranger of Paradise gave us an M-rated B-movie. Enemies bursted unrealistically with blood, and there was hyper-violence, a couple F-bombs thrown in there, but 16 is a grounded M-rated story. Many have compared it to Game of Thrones, and there are more F-bombs in the opening sequence of Final Fantasy XVI than there are in the entirety of Stranger of Paradise. Blood is used and shown appropriately when it needs to and is less glorified than those other titles. 16 is also the first M-rated game to make use of sex for storytelling purposes. Although it's definitely not as much as Game of Thrones. And there is no visible full frontal nudity, so there still remains an uncrossed line for the series here. I wouldn't say the addition of sex scenes added much to the story. Some of those scenes were weirder than others, but absolutely nothing felt as raunchy as the luxury hand massage scene in Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Let's start with the tips. Just like this. Is this how you like it? How about this? Or maybe this?
Oh, right, the plot. The plot in a nutshell is about Clive building a resistance of bearers and taking out the mother crystals of the land to strip power from the corrupt leaders of the world and show the people that we can choose to live how we want and take fate into our own hands, you know. That's a vague way of saying it, but it's one of those stories sprinkled with heavy spoilers all around, so it's hard to even talk about the beginning. Now will be our first active time spoil section. I'll explain the inciting incident more clearly, but this part will still only cover stuff in like the first quarter of the game. The real story spoilers will come in the proper story review section of this video, but if you don't want to hear anything more, skip to the next chapter. Final Fantasy XVI is a story told over 3 eras of Clive's life, and each time skip comes with a major story event. The first era is really just the prologue that sets everything else up when Clive is just a teenager. There's only one reason why I put an ATS section in the story prologue part of the review. The real inciting incident that drives Clive for the first half of the game is when he witnesses his younger brother get killed and his dad decapitated in front of him. Some wouldn't consider this a spoiler since it's just the kickoff to the story, but it's supposed to be a surprise. It was a surprise to me. It was devastating. Those were the only 2 people who gave a crap about Clive, and now they're gone, and his demon of a mother is still around. And it's her fault, by the way. She's the one who organized a betrayal in exchange for an even higher position of power with another nation. Not only is Clive feeling the tremendous loss of 2 loved ones, he's also hit with the failure of his one job, to protect Joshua. The dad gets hit first and trauma ends up finally awakening the phoenix inside Joshua, and he transforms to fight the murderers back. But then Ifrit gets awakened and brutally bashes Phoenix's head in as Clive watches it all through an out-of-body experience. For some reason, the story seems to want you not to know that Clive is the dominant of Ifrit. Even though that's practically advertised all over the marketing of the game, I was avoiding everything, and even I knew that. So I think it's meant to be a surprise in the first time skip when Clive discovers the truth about himself. He's not just a bearer, he's the dominant of Ifrit. And when he awakened at the same time as his brother, but couldn't control himself, he murdered him with his own Eikon hands. His mother, who caused all this suffering, has now accepted her seat alongside the Emperor of Sanbreak. Her plan was for Clive to just get slaughtered among all the carnage of the betrayal, but she didn't know that he was Ifrit, so when he miraculously was still alive the next day, she immediately sent him off to be a slave in the army where his dad could no longer protect him from being treated like the rest of the bearers of the world, and he is branded with the mark. So the first act really begins when it cuts to Clive 13 years later as a young adult, still holding this tremendous weight on his shoulders. His quest is that of revenge. Revenge against those who took his family and revenge for the rest of the bearers of the world. And that's just the intro. We'll talk about the rest later. Let's shift gears and get into gameplay. I want to talk about the part that changes most drastically generally between mainlines, the exploration. Unlike the combat system, which has gradually become action-based over time as we've discussed on the show, there's not really a consistency to how worlds are built in Final Fantasy games. It used to be very consistent when looking at 1 through 9. There's an overworld, maybe some hidden things to do, treasures in caves. You're fairly limited on where you can go until the big airship moment that lets you free roam the world. Every one of those games was like that, but that all kinda died in a blink with Final Fantasy X, and since then each game was a little different. 10 was completely linear, 11 and 14 were massive MMO worlds, 12 was a bit more open like the old traditional games, and then 13 is linear again, and then 15 is half fully open world and half completely linear, and then 7 Remake was just linear. It's always a mystery what you're gonna get. I heard the developers describe 16's map style as open zone. This is a term that a few other developers have been using more and more, but I found that it means something different on a case-by-case basis. I first heard the term used to describe God of War 2018. There it meant that the whole game was split into a handful of smaller maps, zones that you could openly explore but couldn't get to until progressing enough in the story. It was practically my favorite aspect of those two games. It was later used to describe Sonic Frontiers, which is basically, from my understanding, a stage-based game where every stage is an open world, so it's kind of a different deal. And now 16 is also open zone, even though it's different from each of those. There's pros and cons to making your game linear or open. Linear style could be a little tiring and claustrophobic for a big game like an RPG, but it lets you pace the story and difficulty curve exactly how you want. Open style gives the player an exhilarating sense of adventure, freedom to explore and discover on their own pace without the game telling them to go somewhere. It makes it so much more immersive. But the main story tends to suffer a lot in these games. Sometimes there's barely a story at all because it's very difficult to pace a story when trying to also provide that freedom. And then there's the problem with actually filling that world and figuring out a good way to traverse it. How much of it is just empty, or do you feel like you're wasting your time simply walking to the next point? The open zones of modern God of War are the best example I can think of a marriage of both styles. You get all the pros of linear and open style with barely any cons. It completely changed my perspective on trendy game design after playing it. So when they said Final Fantasy XVI was open zone, I got hyped. But alas, their definition was different than mine. The game is split into 4 regions. Each region is its own map, but there is no seamless connection between the 4. Essentially, that is all they meant by open zone. But the thing is, I struggle to accept even calling these zones open. You can take a look yourself. They're not exactly widespread explorable areas, and they're full of tight corridors. I'm not gonna bury the lead any longer. I would describe Final Fantasy XVI as a linear game. The overworld map is laid out to look like an open world, but you basically cover each of these 4 areas one by one, starting from the bottom and heading to the top as the main quest line guides you. If you could rearrange the regions to be side by side by side by side, this game would play almost exactly like Final Fantasy X, except that you start with the ability to teleport to previous levels instead of having to unlock it later. And some quests will want you to go back to those areas to talk to some guy or collect something, but you're not gonna find any other reason to ever go back. That's the real problem with me describing it as open. What makes a game open? Personally, I think that means there's stuff you can discover and explore freely at your own pace. By that definition, Final Fantasy XVI is not open, and that is due to one thing. There's simply nothing to discover. There is nothing to stumble upon. There is no side quest you can find on your own. Everything you can do in this game pops up on your map as soon as you unlock it, because you're only able to do things when the game says you can. When walking around, you might notice a dead end that branches off the path you're on. Your conditioned gamer brain will tell you, oh dude, we gotta check out, we gotta go look over there, we gotta check that out. So you'll make the trip over and be greeted with a completely empty spot. It sure looks like something important happens here, but not right now. Then a side quest will appear in town later. You'll pick it up and a guy will say, oh, I saw a monster somewhere down that road. And you won't even have to look for it because the marker will be placed right where you just were. And only now when you go, you'll fight a big monster. Only after all the adventurous discoverability was sucked away and you knew exactly what was coming. Why even let players walk there themselves? Why not just teleport them there when they get the side quest? At that point, there's no reason to traverse this world. Actually, one of the patches they released months later did add a teleport feature to the side quests. Only for turning in completed quests though. An option will pop up temporarily to let you poof right to the quest guy using the power of SSD gaming. It's very convenient, and I sympathize with the launch players who had to walk a lot more than I did. But it really emphasizes the problem with how the game is structured. The boiled down 16 experience is teleporting to the point that's closest to wherever your quest marker is, beelining directly there, doing the thing, and teleporting back. After 2 or 3 empty dead ends, you'll realize how it wants you to play, and you'll adapt. You'll stop even trying to explore. And look, I don't mind a linear game. I like when they cut the crap and just let me get right to where I need to be. If I had to choose between linear versus open world, I would choose linear. But it's the way 16 is masked like it's an open world that is bothersome to me. If you wanted to make Final Fantasy X, you could have just did that. But the world design is the problem. I don't actually mind the structure of throwing a couple side quests to you at once when the game is ready. That's kind of what got me addicted to doing all of them, because they were easy to pick up one by one. It doesn't throw everything at you at once. Final Fantasy VII Remake had a similar structure, but because that game was obviously fully linear out the gate, it never hurt the world building, because there really aren't any dead-end corridors that look important until the game shows you their purpose. You're never free to go far away and explore, so you'll never be disappointed. Makes me wonder how this issue will be handled in Rebirth. This game has the claustrophobia and lack of large-scale adventure like a linear game, but also has the emptiness and filler of an open game. And I don't think this particular issue is going to make or break the experience for anyone. It's still a gorgeous world and it's still fun to play. But because of this, it's missing something that most other main lines have, and it kind of makes you feel like you're just checking off boxes off a list the whole time. It kind of feels like Final Fantasy XIV. Yeah, didn't I bring up this same point when I played A Realm Reborn? That's a case where you eventually just have to accept it because it's a story-based MMO and things need to be structured a certain way. But somebody should have told them that single-player games don't need to be like that. This was but one of many common traits and quirks between the two titles. If you have a history with 14, get ready to be constantly reminded that 16 was made by the same people. But wow, I should say, it is crazy to think that this is running on the same engine as the game with the grape blocks. It's very pretty and mostly smooth. You can pick between performance or graphics mode, and I never even tried graphics mode, but it still looks great. There were just a few frame drop moments. I've heard people had bigger problems with frame rates, but I can't confirm if they were just exaggerating or if I got lucky. Here's a sad fact. This is the first true PlayStation 5 exclusive I have played on the console in the 3 years I've owned it. So it's funny that we seem to already be pushing its limits a bit. It would definitely run worse on my PC, so at least it's worth it for that. Hey, here's another thing it has in common with 14. Clive is almost as slow as the Warrior of Light. Yeah, you know how third-person action video games have sprint buttons? Not this one. You can't run in towns. And I don't know if it's just me, but this guy's a bit too slow. Outside of towns, you can run, but only after holding forward for like a few seconds too long. It bothers me every time. But you'll unlock a chocobo eventually, so you don't really need to sprint after that. My point is that there are some practices you just expect for games like this, and they're oddly missing from 16, and my theory is because the team is too used to the limitations of working on an MMO. I did have a lot of fun trying to catch all the reused concepts from 14, and I ended up with a whole list of them. So why not, just for the heck of it, here's the list of things I've picked up on. These are generally things only found in 14 and 16, not the other main lines. Here we go. Reused animations. There aren't a lot of them, but they're there. You can see it with the characters sitting at the table, specifically when they use the same camera angle too. Quests with a plus to indicate they are more important and will unlock something. Dungeons that are entirely self-contained stages separated from the overworld. Linear dungeon layouts where you just kind of walk forward, mobs of enemies appear, and then there are a couple boss rooms along the way. Cooldowns. Orange AoE lines and circles for you to avoid. The orbs falling down with a line through them into a circle attacks. Stop enemy from charging big attack too far attacks. Boss fight in big circle around fire. Warning before a lot of cutscenes will play. Multiple limit break gauges. Aether. Akasha. The Mother Crystal. Final Fantasy IV favoritism, British people, saying would that it were, and other weird old English things. Music by Masayoshi Soken, special lyric tracks featuring the Primals. The sky looks different in one of the areas due to a glamour. Some quest names copied word for word. Expansion that adds a whole new area to explore, but you must re-unlock your fast speed mount via side quest. Different quest accepted / completed jingles depending on the expansion. The first weapon you get in expansion is more powerful than the extensive side quest optional most powerful weapon you got in the base game. Secret rebel hideout you always return to where your friends stay and plan their next move. Okay, I just got a few more, but they're story spoilers, so I'm activating ATS. Skip ahead. Ready? Okay. Secret rebel hideout you always return to where your friends stay and plan their next move gets invaded and a bunch of people die and you have to find a new one. Bahamut uses Zeta Flare to destroy a whole area. And yes, I checked this. I believe this move is only used by Bahamut one time in Final Fantasy. The Calamity of 14 1.0. And it's also used by Donald Duck. One antagonist slices his own throat after making a big speech. I don't think this happens anywhere other than 14 Stormblood, but I could be wrong. And finally, credits appearing on the side of the screen during the ending cutscene. Well, that was fun. I had to get it out of my system. I don't know if there's anything even controversial about most of that. So how about we move on to the most controversial thing about Final Fantasy XVI. Some people say it's the story, but a lot of others say it's the combat. I've heard such awful mockery from haters who think the Stranger of Paradise spin-off, Appetizer, outdid the mainline series. I've heard it be called shallow. I've heard it called Devil May Clive. So I've brought this up in a few other videos, but the upset reaction to Final Fantasy becoming an action game all of a sudden is extremely unfair. The inception of ATB was always about getting the action closer to the player's hand. They couldn't yet call it real time, so they invented a new term to describe it. We stuck with ATB for a while. Some games departed from it and did their own thing until 11 finally gave us the real-time battle system. Every mainline since then has had a real-time element, and then Lightning Returns was an action RPG. Final Fantasy 15 was an action RPG. Final Fantasy VII Remake was an action RPG. I refuse to hold Final Fantasy 16 at fault for straying too far from its own roots, or whatever people say. But if you want to be a real-time action game, I'm gonna criticize you like one. There's an awful lot of competition in that field. Devil May Cry, the aforementioned modern God of Wars, thou holiest of obligatory mentions, Dark Souls, and a series quite close to home, Kingdom Hearts. The Kingdom Hearts team reportedly helped out in the development of 16's combat system. There's a few carryovers you can notice. I didn't make a list or anything, don't worry. I'll just point out the most obvious one, which is one of your moves that's a direct copy of the shot lock from Birth by Sleep and Kingdom Hearts 3. It otherwise doesn't feel that much like Kingdom Hearts. I mean, you can juggle enemies upwards through aerial combos, but there isn't that real-time menu navigation element. Everything else is accessible in like 2 or 3 trigger inputs. Your basic moves are as basic as they come: sword swing or magic projectile. But it is fun that you can spam that projectile. It barely does any damage, but you can do it. No more MP bar limiting you to a certain amount of uses. Instead, all your special Eikon abilities have their own individual cooldowns between use, but it's up to you to time things correctly. You can charge up your melee attack or ranged attack too, and the most satisfying part about that is you can charge it in the middle of another attack. So I could be watching an execution move be performed while I'm holding down the button, so once it's done, I let go and slam the sword down right away. And that was just really fun. That never got old. You can kinda Goomba jump enemies, which is funny, but it doesn't do a lot of damage and I never found much of a use for it. You can slam the sword down or lunge at an enemy to cover ground. These are all your basic tools to fight with. But what about defense? Clive ain't no paladin. There's no shield or blocking mechanic to help you here. You must rely on one of the main gimmicks of the combat system, the precision dodge. Simply smash the dodge button when you're about to get hit, and if it was a close enough call, time will slow down, and for a second, you'll get an opportunity to counter with a satisfying slice. This very simple concept was practically the funnest thing to do for me. So much so that I think the combat would be pretty weak without it. There's not really challenge in dodging most enemies, it's just about gambling with how much attack you can fit in, but precision dodging is where you can occasionally get humbled by your hubris. But it's so satisfying to smack an enemy hard in the face for their hubris when you dodge precisely. I have a feeling that as I play Final Fantasy VII Rebirth soon after, I'll miss being able to do this a lot. Here's something 16 has in common with the 7 Re-series: the stagger bar returns again. Your equipable Eikon abilities are ranked on 2 scales, how much raw damage output and how much stun or stagger. One must keep a good balance to be the most efficient at killing. Emptying the stagger bar sends you into the same frenzy as it did in 7 Remake. For a short time, the enemy now has a damage multiplier applied to it. You can continue hitting it with the stagger moves that make your multiplier go higher and higher before following with your highest damage dealers, but you're in a strict time frame, and man, it feels so awful to gamble and get that multiplier all the way up only for the stagger period to end right after, right before you use the big attack. But those times when your plan works out and you deal like 100,000 damage, oh, that's the good stuff. The stagger concept is built on a bit too. Now there's a middle point on the stagger bar. If you pass it, there's a small window of opportunity that lets you take down the enemy with a certain grab move. And this puts them into another state where they take increased stagger damage. It's like when enemies get pressured in Final Fantasy VII Remake, but it happens in the same way for everyone. It's predictable, and this allows you to plan for exactly when it happens. You'll learn pretty early on that the whole thing is about coordinating your cooldowns, knowing when you should use them and when to save them. Usually the most powerful moves have longer cooldowns, so I would sometimes try to start the fight with those, and by the time I get the enemy staggered, it's ready to use again. You never want to be sitting on a cooldown for like minutes at a time, but sometimes you don't want to use it because you're afraid, and you gotta just figure it out. Even though Final Fantasy VII Remake didn't have cooldowns in this sense, I found the rush of coordinating your whole team to get the highest damage score more satisfying there. Maybe it's because you're alone in 16. You don't have to jump to another character and order them to attack. It's not that complicated. There's no time freeze because it's real time. So it becomes more stressful to get it to work. I don't know. But the 2 games share a common stagger issue. If you remember, much of the scripted boss sequences in 7 Remake would have an invisible health bar threshold you can pass before the boss changes phases. But if you were right about to stagger it when it hits that threshold, the bar would be reset in the next phase. 16's problem is kind of the same. I stagger the boss right before that phase change, but he can't phase change until he's out of stagger. So I use up all my moves and look up in the corner, and the health bar isn't even draining a little bit, not at all. I just wasted everything trying to get this giant attack in to deal no damage because I hit that invisible threshold. Guys, there's gotta be a solution to this. It's so frustrating. I don't need every boss to have 4 phases, but if you must, why not just make the threshold visible? Just slap a line in there like you do with the stagger bar, then at least I'd know. You'll also eventually unlock the limit break gauge, which can be upgraded to a maximum of 4 bars. It semi-primes you with the power of Ifrit and Phoenix, enhancing all attacks with a wafty flame and doing increased damage and healing. It's yet another bar you must manage and execute at the best time. But you know what's annoying? This one drains fast, and it drains while animations play. Like, you know when you stagger an enemy and it cuts to them falling over? Or you execute a super move and time temporarily freezes while it plays the animation. Everything freezes except the limit gauge. It does not obey the laws of time. And if you hit the limit button once you stagger him, the stagger timer still goes down while the limit animation plays, so you kinda gotta pick one or the other. Stagger bar is more valuable, so I save as much of it as I can. It kinda trains you to hit the limit break gauge right before you stagger him to maximize damage. Everything, just everything in this system is about training you to desire one thing and one thing only. The perfect stagger moment when you do everything right and max out the percentage, finishing with your biggest possible attack with no time left to spare. That's the dream, because fights can last pretty long if you miss that window of big damage. Even normal enemies too small to have a stagger bar can be pretty meaty. Your normal stored attacks, they'll give them a scratch, but by the end of the game, if you encounter a big group of enemies, you're probably just going to be like, whatever. Use the strongest move in the game and just clear them out. One thing I noticed when looking through the patches we got since launch, every one of them included buffs for certain abilities, either lowering the cooldown time or just upping the damage, something like that. I didn't see a single nerf. They might have made enemies a little too meaty for your basic moves. Oh, but wait, I almost forgot. There's another basic move you have besides slice and shoot. You have dog. The D-pad space is taken up by Torgal moves, either a damaging sick or a move that tosses small enemies in the air, built for setting up cool combos. Torgal's the only other character you have somewhat control over, so I treasured him. He's extremely simple, and so is his upgrade bar that's based on how often you use each of his moves. I think all it does is make him a little stronger as you go, but it's something. So even if you're in the middle of dying, there's still some actions you can take. Speaking of healing, you can switch the D-pad to your potion menu where you'll have your main source of HP gain. You can hold a small, limited number of potions, so don't run out. Alright, let's be real, it's hard to run out. We're not talking Final Fantasy XV infinite potion spam, but they give you a lot. In the beginning you can only hold 4, but these aren't Estus flasks. You can just find some on the ground and then you'll get your stock replenished. If you're about to face a boss, there's going to be a ton right there because they want you filled up. And then there's another slot for high potions, which are even more potent. Then there's another slot for different potions. These can be attack boosters, defense boosters, or eventually elixirs and auto revives even. And certain side quests do increase your potion capacity. Yeah, this makes the game pretty easy. I only died on a boss if I wasn't paying attention to my health. As long as you use potions liberally, you're probably never gonna die. There are still some challenges to face in the side content though, and we'll get to those. The main story being easy is kinda par for the course for giant games like this nowadays. I wish it were more challenging, but I still had a lot of fun. There's challenge around if you seek it, and if you're a fan of breaking down a game's system and pursuing the highest damage possible, there are tools to help you. Final Fantasy XVI has a fighting game style training mode complete with a live controller input feed. It's great for when you get a new move, but you can't quite tell if it's better than the other one you were using. And controller inputs are fully customizable, so you can play as you like and make the dodge button circle, because like, why wasn't it circle? After enough experimenting, I came up with the most efficient system that worked for me. I'm sure someone else out there has mathematically proven which combination of abilities is objectively the best, but I was more than happy with my setup. We'll talk about it in a bit, although I think I just accidentally summed up the biggest problem with the combat right there. Most RPG battles require some level of almost puzzle solving to use moves that the enemy is weak against, use the right buffs or debuffs, or build or equip your character in a certain way. Action RPGs focus on this much less, but a boss might be privy to a special gimmick that forces you to at least fight or move in a certain way. That's not quite so in this game. The biggest problem with Final Fantasy XVI's combat is that it can be mathematically solved because there is nothing stopping you from fighting every fight the exact same way. And if you're like me, you probably will, just because you find the moves you like and you stick with them. There's no reason to ever change what you do. With an emphasis on icons, you'd think they'd encourage some experimentation with an elemental weakness system of some sort, or build battles that act like tests to see how well you can fight with each one of them. Well, they actually did kind of do that, but it's side content. If we're talking main story, the thrill of attacking might start to wear thin, but the thrill of dodging for me was fun through the whole way because bosses just kept getting crazier and crazier. You do gotta be careful. If you do too much side content, you might make yourself too strong. I found the difficulty of this game acted like a bell curve. I felt slow and weak in the beginning, hit a sweet spot for a while in the middle where I was taking on super bosses who were levels above me, and then it felt almost too overpowered towards the end with the rewards I'd earned by that point. It should have took level syncing from 14. I want to see a single player game use the level syncing mechanic from Final Fantasy XIV. That'll be the day. But anyway, 16's combat, it's a mixed bag. I can definitely see where the disappointment lies for some, but for those who want something fun and flashy to make them feel like they're using god powers to destroy things, this ticks that box pretty hard. It doesn't match the highs of 7 Remake's dynamic action ATB hybrid party system, but it's an improvement over Final Fantasy XV's spam warp strike until the thing dies combat system. Now let's move on to the always important part of RPGs, character growth. It's another aspect that tends to get more simplified when you add that A on to ARPGs. Unless you're talking about Stranger of Paradise. 16's weird with it. There's basically no growth. You can level up, but that hasn't meant much in the past few games, has it? But you can also earn ability points with your levels as well as for doing side quests and beating bosses and stuff. As the story progresses, Clive either takes or is given the Eikon abilities of other dominants. I'm gonna issue a slight spoiler warning here, not gonna go full ATS, I won't be talking about story at all, but some may want to be surprised by the moves you learn, so skip ahead if you wish. Your abilities start in this big middle ring here. These nodes are for your basic attacks, lunging, simple comboing, all that stuff. But in the middle you have your cooldown abilities. Each icon you gain has 3 of these plus an ultimate, which is a big attack that outdoes the other ones but is much more expensive and has a longer cooldown. You can upgrade any of these abilities once or twice to improve them. And that's character growth. Playing around with these abilities a bit can be fun, but there's no way to upgrade or build Clive otherwise in any meaningful way. The middle ring is important because those are all permanent things you can always do. In the early game, you'll have to pick and choose which ones matter more to you, and it works almost like a skill tree, but these are so cheap. After you're just a few hours in, you'll realize you can just fully upgrade all of them in the circle without even feeling it. It's like the game just wants everyone to have them. I mean, they do. So, like, why are they even options? Choosing which of the other icons to spend AP on is also a very easy decision. Which one do you like using? Upgrade that one. Eventually, you'll be able to switch between any 3 icons at once, and you can equip 2 abilities per slot. So, you just stick to those 6 abilities, and you're good. You can master any of these abilities, which is the most expensive final upgrade, but the only thing that lets you do is equip that ability to another icon. Basically the same idea as mastering a job in a job system, you know, it lets you equip those job moves to a different job, and that matters, that changes the game. In 16, equipping a new ability to a different icon? It's kind of like, who cares? The 3 icons that you choose to have don't have any effect on Clive, except for their special and their equipable abilities. So if you take a Titan attack, put it on a Phoenix, there's no special combo effect. You can just use that attack now. And like all of the attacks are just damage dealers. They don't change it up. There's no special defense or heals or anything. They're all just damage. I only felt the need to master an ability once in the whole game, only because I like that Titan Punch move more than Bahamut's other abilities, but I wanted Bahamut, so I mastered Titan Punch. It's not a very exciting thing. It felt like something was missing from the system. I had so many points left over because I didn't need them. Like, the only things I could have spent those points on were other icons I wasn't using. But my Clive wasn't the exact same the whole game. Whenever I unlocked a new icon, I gave it a fair shot. Sometimes I liked it more and replaced what I was using. Others I just simply wasn't feeling, didn't feel as good, and I kept the old one. See, they provide you an equal amount of moves that are better for groups of small enemies versus moves that are better for striking one big guy. The problem with this is that moves that kill big guys are just more important. You can bring one move that wipes a group out, you might need it, but you'll be much better off if the rest of your attacks are for single big targets. Small enemies are just not enough of a threat. If you run into a boss fight with half your slots dedicated to spread out AoEs, you're not gonna have a good time. Those aren't gonna damage that boss. I want to run through each of the 7 icon special abilities to show you how I made the choices for my final setup and never looked back. Phoenix Shift is a simple quick dash forward, incredibly practical. You're always going to need to clear space between you and the enemy. That's why it's the first one you get. You'll probably use it for most if not all of the game because it's hard to part ways with something as useful as that. Garuda Grab, actually it's called Garuda Deadly Embrace. Garuda Grab can yoink a faraway enemy right into your face. Use it on a big enemy to launch yourself in the air or pull them down when you cross that middle stagger line. It's the only icon special ability that is tied exclusively to an important combat mechanic. That seems a little unfair. Ramu Ray is the shot lock from Kingdom Hearts. Point, lock on, release, and you'll shoot at a bunch of orbs. Then hit the button again to detonate them. It's not that powerful and it's not that practical. I dropped it. Titan Block is a guard move. There's that shield I was missing. It works as any normal block would, but certain attacks will still break through it. You can still stop those, though, if you perform a precision block at the last second. Works the same as a precision dodge, but the timing is even tighter and riskier. Like if you dodge too early, you won't get the counter, but you also won't get hit. If you shield too early, you just eat shit. But a precision block is even more satisfying because if you pull it off, you can counter 3 times back. Oh, the dopamine. Yeah, so I loved using that one. Bahamut's wings gamify the dodge button further by letting you store up power with each dodge. You can only move slowly and dodge while the wings are out, but I found this to be perfect for those moments where you can't hit the boss because it's doing some background shooting attack. Also good for when you're waiting for cooldowns to come back. You're asking to be attacked and absorbing every hit. It kind of makes you feel like you're Neo. Then you hit that full charge and execute a full power mega flare. You deal a bunch of damage over time. So have that going while you unleash all your stagger attacks. It's just bonuses on bonuses. I kept switching between Titan and Bahamut for their similar use cases, but ultimately went with Bahamut for its practicality. Shiva's Snap lets you move faster while sliding on ice and dodging to freeze enemies for a short time. It's pretty fun, but I didn't find it as effective as others. Finally, Odin's Arm lets you perform the legendary move Zantetsuken. Hitting the button changes your sword to a weaker version, but each hit charges the Zantetsuken gauge. It's a rough trade-off, but the fully charged attack is so devastating that it's actually worth using on a boss, even if they're not staggered. At first I thought the gauge took too long, but then I realized that using 2 Odin abilities successfully fills the gauge from 0 to max on its own. And these are some of the fastest recharging cooldowns in the game. When I referenced a little earlier that swarms of small enemies kind of stop mattering, this is basically what I was talking about. One single Zantetsu and they're all gone. We've been able to use Zantetsuken before in other games via a summon, and like every other instant death attack, it basically never works. This is the first time the real power of Odin actually felt like it was at your hands. The range is so wide, and I don't think I've ever used it without instantly killing the swarm of enemies around me. So, the 3 of these moves you equip will decide your strategy. I don't know anyone who went with Ramu. Shiva and Titan were also pretty unpopular, but when I looked in threads online for people sharing their setup, the vast majority of them had Garuda. I find it kind of baffling that they built a core stagger mechanic off of being able to grab them at the halfway mark. If you don't equip Garuda, that halfway mark doesn't mean anything and you miss out on stagger pressure. You know, this would be cool if the other icons had similar combat mechanics that synergized with their abilities, but they don't. It's like you kind of just have to use Garuda. So my own perfect strategy that I always attempt to perform was with Odin, Garuda, and Bahamut. Start the battle with Zantetsuken just because why not? Use other staggering moves like Gouge to get the boss close to halfway. Whenever you're not in his face, you should be trying to dodge with Bahamut. Use Garuda Tornado and move right before you cross the halfway mark. If you do it after, you'll waste pressure time. You can also use Diamond Dust here too, but the tornado lasts so damn long it should still be there when we get to the end of the stagger bar. So do the Garuda grab now to send him into the pressured state. Sometimes this animation is long, but the tornado still gets hits in during the animation, so it's fine. When he's down, use Gouge again and one of the Odin moves. Your Odin gauge should be about halfway and your Bahamut gauge should be full. Hold on to what you can and get him almost all the way to stagger. Start Mega Flare. Use the Gun Gear Odin move to finish the stagger gauge off. This is because halfway through the move you totally freeze time and get a huge starting bonus to the damage multiplier. Also, Odin gauge should be full now. Start Limit Break. Dump everything that is recharged by this point, ending with Giga Flare, the giant Bahamut laser that does huge damage. And with just enough time left after you're finished with all that, hit him with the max level Zantetsuken again. It's so rare that I can actually pull it off perfectly like that, but it was always the dream. I realize this review has been skewing negative for the most part. That little spiel was my way of saying, remember, all these criticisms aside, the game is still definitely a fun time. I just wish there was more to do with your ability points, or if growth was tied to story progression instead of a points system. I know you unlock icons based on story, but I'm talking about the moves. Kingdom Hearts is an ability point-based action RPG where you earn moves by leveling up. In a very simple and clean way, you earn the strong stuff at the end of the game when you reach a higher level. But moves can also be found through side content and main story progression. Some bosses just give you important new moves when defeated so that the devs don't have to worry about what level you are and they can build bosses around knowing that you have that ability for sure. But when the devs have to worry about what the player has, they can't build anything off of anything specifically. And you end up with a system like this where things cost hundreds or thousands of points and they just dump amounts on you at random intervals. There's nothing to unlock, every ability is just there to buy whenever, and they all kind of blend together. I think I've gone on enough about it though, you get the idea. Once again though, it is better than Final Fantasy XV's skill trees. At least these upgrades mean something. But what about when you go full primal? When it's time to take down a god by becoming a god, you reach peak spectacle. Icon battles in Final Fantasy XVI are epic. Epic is an understatement. Super long fights with multiple phases, the biggest, flashiest attacks you can think of. I can't say much without spoiling what the icons are again, so I'm gonna have to give an ATS warning here too. Alright, ready? A little spoilery. Not really story, but just a little spoilery. So, when you get to play as Ifrit, all your moves are similar to Clive's, but roided out. You can't use other icon abilities, but you gain more stuff for your Ifrit form as you go. There are only a handful of these fights, but they're awesome. It's overall simpler. They're not like super challenging, but it's all about the presentation. Just enjoy the ride. The best way I can describe them is like when you finally get to play as Super Sonic. The Titan fight in particular was so much a Sonic the Hedgehog fight. It was crazy. You are sprinting up these spires and slamming into his head. I mean, you fight a laser shooting dragon in space. It's so good. I never knew Ifrit was the smallest Eikon of all because he's just like a little guy compared to everyone else. Unfortunately though, there's no Odin Eikon battle. Very strange. They build up to it like it's gonna happen like all the other ones, but then it just doesn't happen. Was it cut for time or something? Anyway, the game just loves being cinematic, as we'll talk about soon, and these were the most cinematic parts that still had you playing the game. So I guess now's a good time to mention QTEs are back, but they call them cinematic strikes and cinematic blocks. Back in my day, we called them cinematic actions. As a PS5 exclusive, for now, it's gonna make use of those stupid haptic triggers. You can't just open a door anymore, you gotta feel the door. And this game is also a huge fan of the speaker in the controller. So many actions get pushed through that thing, it's like always making whoosh noises and stuff. I think Torgal can bark through it at some point, I don't really remember. Oh, also you can pet the dog, yay. Next up we should talk about crafting and equipment. There's a little more to improving yourself other than Eikon abilities. We have crafting. There's a blacksmith stationed in your hideaway who wants nothing more than to provide you with his best work possible. You'll earn crafting materials for defeating bosses and better ones for hunting optional bosses. When you earn enough, you can craft a new sword that does more damage or new armor that has higher defense. That's crafting. None of the swords have special abilities or different stat boosts. The whole system is just, oh, this one's better, equip that. Calling it a crafting system is a bit of an exaggeration. It's like, why even have one? AAA games always be like, well, we gotta have a crafting system because every game has a crafting system. And half the time it's just this shoehorned basic linear upgrading. I'm getting a little tired of it. In addition to your sword and 2 armor slots, you have 3 accessory slots. These are your equipment pieces that might actually alter your playstyle, but they aren't involved in the crafting system at all. You just find them through bosses or you can buy them in the shop. Money is used for almost nothing else, so buy whatever you want. Many of these accessories are tied to Eikon abilities, so if you're emphasizing your strategy around specific moves, you can make them better. Maybe increase their damage output or lower their cooldown by 4.2 seconds. Yay! Woohoo! Sorry, but these were kind of boring too. Like, with only 3 slots, I personally never wanted to take one up just so one ability can cool down 4.2 seconds faster. But most of the accessories are just that. Some of them were better, like increase all damage by 5%. Yay! Increase potion potency, which you won't need, but it is better. And then there's a couple like accessibility ones like auto charge for magic attacks and auto Torgal attacks. But you know I'm gonna equip the increase XP gains by 15% item and never take it off. I really got nothing more to add to the equipment discussion. It just doesn't grow beyond that. It is what it is. I earned many of these items through the game's side content. I didn't care for most of them, but I kept doing the side quests because I just enjoyed them for the most part. The scale of side quest quality goes all over the place. Some are about a guy who needs you to fight a pack of wolves over there for a reward of some gold. Others are more about world building and character building. Those ones were great. I've heard a lot of hate about the side quests. Like, people were saying they were all super boring and uninteresting and lame, and I'm like, I thought they were one of the stronger strengths of the game. Open world game side quests tend to be the most boring filler stuff, but this game has such a thick layer of lore. I was interested in learning more. I think back to Final Fantasy XV's deluge of side quests that were all just the same crap, and they would chain into other ones like forever. You'd pick flowers for this guy and complete his quest, and then another would appear from the same guy right away saying, hey, you know, there were other flowers I wanted. And you do that, and then another quest would appear from the same guy saying, I would like some more of those other flowers. That just drove me insane. But since, as we discussed, Final Fantasy XVI is a linear game wearing an open world mask, it doesn't really have this problem. Usually, after major story events, a small handful of side quests will then appear in the hideaway. The hideaway is your hub area you'll return to whenever anything happens. It holds all the major NPCs, each with their own distinct voice and character. I really grew to love these guys. My favorite was Lady Sharon, the stubborn old lady who everyone's just a little afraid of. Blackthorn, the blacksmith, is also very fun to talk to, even though he's a big grump. And then there's Goots, who's like missing a couple brain cells, and then there's Tarja, the nurse lady who keeps getting pissed off because we won't stop hurting ourselves, Harpocrates, the sweet old lawsman who knows everything about everything, and then Vivian, the political genius who is always piecing together the Empire's next move, and a handful of others. The more side quests you do, the more this crew will start to feel like a big family. You just have to comb through to find the good ones. A post-launch patch helped this by changing some of the quest icons. The treasure chest icon indicates a quest that will end with you receiving a keepsake of some sort. Clive has his very own commander's room where he can read mail sent to him from people, but he uses most of the real estate to store his little treasures. Each piece holds a memory of a story you experienced through their side quests, and I thought that was neat. Through some kind of collector's compulsion, I ended up doing every side quest in the game. Most of them were enjoyable, but the lame ones were quick to get through anyway. None of them actually annoyed me, and I didn't mind doing them. And they didn't start endless quest chains either. They're even quicker than they were on launch, thanks to that wonderful new feature added post-launch, allowing you to instant teleport to the quest giver when it's over. Even if you're already in town with the guy and he's just over there, load times are so good now, it's still faster to teleport and go through the loading screen. Now, some quests do have chains that let you continue the story farther after passing particular main quests, but these are reserved for important ones for important character development and unlockables, like Blackthorn's quest series that ends with you getting the recipe for the best sword in the game. Important quests like these that lead to unlockables are marked with a plus, so they're usually a good idea to do them. Getting a chocobo to ride around is locked behind one of these. Even side quest ignorers should do that one. And you'll get a little story about Clive reuniting with his childhood chocobo. It was really sweet. Don't even get me started on the Torgal questline, dude. I will literally cry. But you know why I was really compelled to do all the side quests? The renown system. You earn renown for doing basically anything, and there's a list of milestones you can earn for a bunch of rewards. I desired to be the most renown in the world, so I had to do everything. I wish the final reward was like some crazy powerful thing, but unfortunately it's not. It's okay though, I had fun. You know, it's about the journey. You have another avenue for renown too, the hunt board. A tradition that's been in most of these games since Final Fantasy XII. I don't often explore it deeply, but it works similarly here. Nectar the Moogle runs the hunt board that lists a bunch of tougher monsters. They list which area of the map they're in, so you can hunt them down, and it's like boom. A rank fights are fun. They'll be tough if you tackle them early, but S rank fights, ooh boy, they'll make you sweat. The higher challenge I was hoping for is hidden in these fights, and they are very fun. Some of them actually have boss gimmicks that you have to deal with instead of doing the same strategy every time, like the bird that just spams meteor attacks forever, forcing you to keep moving and jumping. This was the height of the combat for me. I highly recommend trying these fights. The first S-rank boss you can find is like 10 levels above you, but it's an intense battle. I like that some of the posters don't even have pictures, so you don't know what you're running into till you get there. Doing all this stuff definitely made the rest of the main game way easier than it was, but I think it was worth it. Only thing is you can't access the hunt board on the go, so to keep track of where they all are, I had to take pictures of the posters on my phone. That's more immersive, I guess. So there actually is one thing you can search and discover in the open world. You might run into these monolith things and Clive will be like, I can't do anything here right now. If you come back later in the game, these will let you access a chronolith trial. There's one for each icon. They're challenges that test how skilled you are with the limitations of using just one to the fullest extent. I was saying before, I kind of wish the whole game was built like this, but these are hard. At least hard to get the high score. It gives you a list of actions that when used will add to your time limit. So you're comboing for survival. You gotta use the moves at the time when they will be best used to get those extra seconds. It teaches you how intricate this game could potentially be. I very much recommend looking into them. Finally, you can go through a similar trial with your own setup in arcade mode. run through dungeon stages again and go for a high score. There's not a combo meter in the game like Devil May Cry, but you can see moves are ranked on a 5-star scale. Completely meaningless in the normal game, but in arcade mode, that's how you know you're making big points. I wasn't into this mode because, you know, these are full dungeons, these levels can be pretty long, and I didn't feel the need to replay them a bunch of times. But there's plenty of extra stuff to do in this game. Finishing all the side quests and beating the story takes just about as long as beating only the story of Final Fantasy XIII, which probably says more about that game than this one. But note, gameplay time is inflated because I was using the counter present on the PS5 home menu, which is not accurate, as I've found out since doing these tests. Why did I use this? Because they didn't put a timer in the game. No gameplay timer in a mainline Final Fantasy? Oh, now I get the haters. That hurts, man. You know I'm doing a series and I'm trying to keep track of this stuff, right? We've come all this way and now I have like a partially inaccurate time for this game. Why would you do this, Yoshi P? Why would you do this? I don't know, but since this game has so much in common with 14, I thought I would dump all the story at the end like I do in those videos. I don't think I want to summarize the whole thing though. I'll just give my thoughts and impressions for the most part, you know, like a review. I'll begin by looking at Final Fantasy XVI's cast of characters. Usually I'll at least break down each of the party members, but that's another huge difference this has against the rest. Something that really does make it feel less Final Fantasy than others. It's lonely. It fits the theme of Clive's miserable adventure, but to not have a party journeying with you is a shocker. Major characters will join you and fight along your side for certain quests, but no one sticks around. They're not like your party. They're just there, and there's zero interaction you can have with them in the combat system. Sometimes I don't even notice when there's a party member with me because I'm doing pretty much all the work. This is a single-player action game. If this franchise is going to continue being more action than RPG, this is one major problem. Action games are generally not designed to have a party. It's difficult to make work. Your pals in Stranger of Paradise were equally as effective and interchangeable, but still a little more interactive than anyone in 16. Focus has been on a single character since Final Fantasy XIII, but you still had a party. You just had to choose which one to actually control. Maybe the closest solution we can have is Final Fantasy XV's method. In 15, you have a party of assistants you could temporarily control, though you were really expected to just be Noctis. But we're talking more about story reasons here than gameplay. I never needed to play as any of the other 15 crew to fall in love with them. Kingdom Hearts uses the same philosophy of assistant party members in Donald and Goofy. They don't do all that much, but the key to the story equation is that they're inseparable. They are known as a trio for that reason, and nobody thinks for more than a second when asked, who are the party members in Kingdom Hearts or Final Fantasy XV? And only 7 Remake brought back a party system where everyone was actually equally playable, mostly equal. But who are the party members in Final Fantasy XVI? Torgal is pretty much always there, so I guess he counts. Some definitely join you for longer than others, but no one sticks around for very long stretches of time. First in the running is probably Jill, childhood friend who got split off from Clive after the incident. This is one of those romances that's mutual all the way through. Like there's no will they, won't they. This isn't a Tidus or Zidane situation where they're chasing the girl the whole time. If anything, Jill's more into it than Clive, but she's got to break through that, all that terrible baggage. During the incident, Jill was taken by the Iron Kingdom to be used as a weapon, for she is a dominant too, the dominant of Shiva. Living as a weapon slave is more than enough motivation to start the resistance up with Clive. But we mentioned in the beginning how magic users are treated as lesser beings, even though they have magic, because the magic is weak and based on if a crystal is nearby or not. That's not the case for dominance. Jill basically has god powers. I mean, that's the reason they're using her. So why she didn't just break away and fly off on a path of ice, I do not know. As a character, Jill has been under the most fire by fans for not being much more than an accessory to Clive. Can't really talk about that without spoiling stuff, so we'll get to it later because it's Cid Update! Happy to present a Cid for the ages. I've been saying that Clive started the Resistance group over the years, but he just kept it going. Cid was the one who started it. He's snarky, he's crass, and he's got one of the graveliest voices I've ever heard.
Our fate means nothing to them. No, this isn't a battle you can win with words. Believe me, I've tried, but nothing ever gets through. The world is simply not ready to listen. So to hell with talking. If they won't give us a say, we'll decide our fates another way. You can't blame a man for wanting to bring an end to all this, can you?
Played by Hollywood actor Ralph Ineson, aka Dagmar Cleftjaw from Game of Thrones, or the Green Knight from The Green Knight. He's a pretty simple guy. He thinks people should have the right to live how they want, and wants to beat the shit out of those who abuse their power. He's the best character in the game. He's also the dominant of Ramu, and he had a rocky breakup with someone on the enemy side who's the dominant of Garuda. In my years of closely examining the Cids of every Final Fantasy, it's nice to know the newest one is up there with some of the best. His right-hand man, Gav, is an important guy too. He'll occasionally come in on missions with you, and after getting to know him, he's a pretty cool guy. On the antagonist side, there's Garuda and Titan, both mean sons of bitches who are dating. And there's this weird love triangle with them and Cid. Dion is the dominant of Bahamut, and he's the protector of the rich region of Sanbreque. All he wants is his father's approval and to be the rightful heir to the throne by becoming prince. Also, he's gay. Like, actually show a kiss on screen gay. That's like a huge deal, isn't it? I mean, some are gonna disagree with me, but this is the first actual gay representation I've seen in this series. There have been plenty of implied or subtle relationships, but this is the only one that actually goes for it. And the best part, Dion's a well-written character who is not defined by this one trait. Trying to keep his boyfriend protected at all costs while keeping the whole thing a secret, that's one part of it, but his main focus is on many other things. He's not defined by his sexuality, and he's all around just a cool guy. On Final Fantasy's first real try, they do it better than 90% of Hollywood. Props to them. Then we got Mrs. Rosefield, Clive's mom, the heartless snake herself. After giving Clive up to slavery and abandoning her fallen nation on a quest for power, she marries the king of Sanbreque and has a child who she forces to get recognized as the new heir to the throne, destroying Dion's destiny and making him an enemy. So what's the deal? Is she the main villain? I was thinking so until we hit Ultima. This weird Christopher Walken Prometheus is your true main antagonist. I can't say much about him since he's one of those villains shrouded in mystery until the end, but all we know at first is that he's manipulating Clive to do something, and he refers to him as Mythos. As far as villains go, he's okay. He really does behave like a Prometheus. He's robotic and matter-of-fact. He's threatening and scary sounding. But as a character, he just feels like another god who wants to watch the world burn. He doesn't have any huge reveals or tricks up his sleeve. He's just there to talk menacingly at you and teleport away. He's not the strongest character. The lack of time spent with these characters is the biggest thing bringing down the story, in my opinion. This is in the top 5 longest main quest lines in the series, but I just don't interact with people that much. Someone's always gotta sit out because they're hurt or they gotta go off and do something else. It's a lot like how they treated the Scions in the first couple expansions of Final Fantasy XIV. And speaking of that, what's a modern Final Fantasy game without pacing issues? They wanted to do something different here and focus on 3 major eras of Clive's life. He's 15 during the prologue, and post-incident after 13 years in slavery, we continue his story. Then there's another 5-year time skip around the halfway point of the game. At 33 years old, he's got over a decade on every Final Fantasy protagonist who came before him, except Lightning in Lightning Returns. She's 500. His age nicely plays into the more mature themes of the game. It's nice not being anime boy number 16. Now you're anime man. And there's a mature design to the world and the characters accordingly. None of these guys are going to be seen posing for fashion magazines this time. No one's overtly sexualized. There isn't even a twinkle of fairy tale. It's a bleak, dying world, and Clive is just tired of it. Could that be another turnoff for some? I wouldn't say this world is any more or less exciting than the 2D games, but it's different when you're trying to be immersed in a 3D experience. I wasn't personally a fan of 9 or 12's worlds either for similar reasons. 9 did have fairy tale flair. 12 had Evilise and a little steampunk. 16 has realism. There's some interest in seeing how that would translate to Final Fantasy, but it's not something I need to see again, honestly. I'm good on this one. The voice acting is top notch. The most important characters do well holding my attention even for the numerous scenes of just talking in a room about what's going on. And no anime grunts. I'm not as much interested in the political history of the world and how each region operates, but if you fancy yourself a loresman, you're gonna be feasting. There are books of information for you to parse through, all kept by Harpocrates in your hideout. None of it's required to follow the story, it's all just there if you're interested. They put so much effort into background info that I doubt the majority of players are going to bother with, but that's still pretty cool. If you're not so much a loresman and find yourself struggling to keep track of story stuff, there's a feature for you too. It's called Active Time Lore. You ever been watching a cutscene and think, wait, who's this guy? Have we seen this guy before? Or am I thinking of someone else? Or what's this thing they were talking about? I don't, it's been like a couple days since I played this. Well, how about this? Press the touchpad to bring up a PlayStation Vita menu screen with every important person and concept happening in the current scene. It works outside of cutscenes too. Someone's job was to create the appropriate context menu for every moment in the game. At first I laughed at this idea and how much work it probably took and how silly the name was, but I was unironically using it to remember things by the end. Games have this inherent problem of being incredibly long stories with no natural breaks, and the player has to choose when to break. But I never played one with a real-time remind me who this is feature. Now I wish it was in every game. And there's even more lore resources if you go to Vivian. She makes actual lectures you can sit down and watch. Sometimes you do it for story purposes. She breaks out the map and moves the pieces around totally in her element. Again, this is a lot that I didn't mess with much, but I love when NPCs are more than a menu delivery system. Vivian is a real character. She has a tough exterior, but she's just pretending that she's not a giant history nerd who gets excited every time you ask about stuff. I mentioned it in the side quest section, but every major NPC in the hideaway has a real personality, and they're around for some main story stuff too. If you ever call a meeting, they're gonna be there and they're gonna give their input. It does feel like an extended family. And there's another lore tracking feature from her called the Grand Cast, which is a relationship tree timeline. You can see every character's connection with everyone else and see what changes throughout the adventure. The best feature is these little speech bubbles. At any point in time, you can read a character's direct personal feelings about anyone. It's so extensive and impressive. You can read Torgal's thoughts. I can waste so much time reading how these things change. Some of them are just gut-wrenching. If you go in the Prologue era, young Clive's thoughts on his mom is just, she doesn't love me. Damn. I can't show much of this feature here because it's basically a spoil simulator. So how about we move on to music? It almost doesn't matter how the world is designed if the music is doing most of the immersive heavy lifting. Final Fantasy XVI's soundtrack is good. I wouldn't say it moved me very much. There are some nice atmosphere songs. Cid's theme, as well as any song they play over the hideaway, makes it super cozy or dour, depending on the situation. Everything else didn't really stick with me. I can't recall any song I had to go listen to again afterwards. but I will listen to the soundtrack as always during the editing process of this video. Maybe I'll have something else to add by then. You know what, I do. This is me. I'm putting the finishing touches on this video, and I have listened to the full soundtrack like twice, adding it into to the timeline, the background. This soundtrack is great. It's better than good. It's great. There's a lot of really nice songs, but when playing the game, they didn't hit me as hard. I'm listening to it now and it's like, oh, these are really good. And it's like, for some reason, in the context of playing it, I don't remember a lot of these tracks. Like when they played or like where were they? I don't know. Something was missing from the gameplay and music experience. I cannot put my finger on it. It's a bigger topic than this small section here, but this is me saying, hey, I gave the soundtrack a bit of a hard time, and it's good. I think a lot of people do the same exact thing. A lot of people who just played the game are like, yeah, the soundtrack is not that great. But then the people who listen to it again later are like, what are you talking about? It's awesome. I don't know. But anyway, I'll jump back into it. The two best songs were the normal and special battle tracks because of that one motif that's really nice. Whenever I started a fight, I would always look forward to when the song slows down and goes... Yeah, no, this is just the build-up, though. This part's great. Ready? It's this part, though, that gets me. This one coming up right now. Oh, it felt so good to be fighting with that in the background. When I revisited Theater Rhythm Final Bar Line, I was happy to see these included. No unexpected snubs here, they did a good job, but my complaint with that game still stands. I would have liked a few more chilled tracks instead of all battle music. The vocal track, My Star, grew on me much more after hearing it again. That's a great one too. And another point against those calling it a non-Final Fantasy game, 16 relishes in itself musically. Prelude and the main theme are used for crescendoing moments more often in this game than any of the others. And if you listen carefully, you'll hear a couple Final Fantasy I songs being transformed into something new, such as the overworld theme hiding as a foreboding version of itself, usually when the characters are in danger. I'm gonna dig into the plot much more in a sec, but I'll give my quick non-spoiler thoughts right now. The story overall is a mixed bag. Cutscenes are many and close between. Do people say that? Like the opposite of few and far between? There's a lot of cutscenes, and they're long. There's at least a couple hold forward on the control stick while characters talk to each other moments. Overall, just a lot of talking. And because it's a tale told across nearly 20 years, the plot is constantly changing. It's a revenge story, then it's a resistance story, then back to revenge. You know Ultima is the big bad because, look at him. But the characters aren't super concerned with Ultima for the majority of the game time. Even when his goal becomes clear, they don't try too hard to prevent it because they're busy fighting one of the other antagonists. It's like a collection of smaller stories spanning each of the regions until eventually it leads to the big problem. I know I keep saying this, but man, it feels like Final Fantasy XIV. You know how 14 tends to structure a story? There's like a build-up to a dungeon where important things happen, then the story sometimes slows down as you deal with townspeople things for a while. The 16 main questline is structured in a pretty similar way, which is not like the other single-player entries. Why, though, in this game are we stopping to check in with the farmers? Did you forget that this wasn't an MMO? You don't need to stretch this plot out to get more subscription money from me, guys. Why are there filler quests? They could have been side quests if you just wanted to fill the world a bit more, but you've done plenty of world building. There's a particular stretch of these filler quests at one point in the game where we're trying to get to the last region to start the final act, but we need a ship. So we spend like 3 main quests in a row getting parts for the ship. After like 300 hours of Final Fantasy XIV, it starts to be par for the course. You're not disappointed anymore, you're just used to it. But I had to step back and remember, this is a different game. Single-player action-adventure games don't do this, because in anything other than an MMO, wasting time is generally seen as a bad thing. I made a point a few minutes ago about the loneliness of this game, the lack of a real party system, the emptiness and straightforwardness of the so-called open world design. Intentionally or not, it all serves the story of Clive Rosefield. And I was being a bit tongue-in-cheek about comparing it to 14 at first, but the more I dissect this game, the less of a joke that comparison becomes. It's like every poor decision that was made is a direct result of a team being way too comfortable redoing what they did for their MMO. Perhaps we finally have our answer. Why do people not like Final Fantasy XVI? Maybe because it feels too much like playing Final Fantasy XIV completely by yourself. No online, no multiplayer, no massive. However, the plot was still enjoyable outside of filler, and now it's time to get into the details. Initiating active time spoil. This is the big stuff you don't want to hear before playing the real story spoilers, so skip ahead. Final warning. Now I can stop calling it the incident. We went over it in the prologue section. Clive loses his brother and father and gets sold into slavery. After the 13-year gap, he reunites with Jill and they meet Sid and the supporting cast of Hideaway people. What I didn't say was Clive had a vision of a mysterious man the night he lost his family. So while he's helping Sid and the people, his primary concern at this time is to track down this mysterious man. He kills the evil lady who is the dominant of Garuda and discovers his special ability to absorb the iconic powers of other dominants. Away from Clive, the mysterious man is revealed to the player as his little brother Joshua. They never found the body because he was whisked away by basically the Secret Service, but was unconscious for years. Most of this guy's childhood was spent in a bed trying to recover with nothing much to do but read. This is where he learned of the god Ultima, and as soon as he was ready, set off on his own journey to figure out how to stop him. We don't actually learn all this right then. They don't even tell us that this is Joshua, as if they want us to try guessing. Oh, it's an orange-haired prince who's 13 years older than Joshua was when we last saw him 13 years ago. Who could this be? Sid convinces us to get terroristic and take down a mother crystal. The people's blind worship of mother crystals is what got the world into this mess, and we need to show them the real light. This particular desire stems from the Empire discovering the hideaway, invading it, and slaughtering anyone they could find. But when we go to take down the mother crystal, disaster strikes, and Ultima makes his grand debut. He's there to spout cryptic messages as villains do, but also to take Clive and absorb his powers. However, Sid protects him and dies in the process. Yeah, I hope no one noticed how little Sid appears in the footage and in the story. I tried to glaze over that fact as best I could in the non-spoiler section. I really should have seen it coming too, since they were paying that Hollywood actor money for this guy. No way was he lasting the whole game. Clive in this moment is saved by his brother, who swoops in and absorbs Ultima to save them all some time, and he leaves him a feather as a way of saying, I'm still out here, I'm still alive, and I'm still the Phoenix. Now that the real threat is known, the next time skip occurs. Sid Update Part 2. When we meet our heroes again, they're continuing the work started by Sid. They've made a new hideaway, and it's bigger. But more importantly, everyone starts calling you Sid. Clive, in honor of his lost friend and keeping the dream alive, took over the mantle and is now known as Sid to the rest of the crew. You get 2 Sids in this game for the price of 1. This is what cemented the death as real and permanent, unlike Joshua's. It's sad, Not a lot of real deaths happen in Final Fantasy, especially at the halfway point, but this one has ripples that affect the rest of the journey. I can only think of one other main line that does a death this significantly, and the one, it's a big one. He was such a lovable character too. He took care of Torgal over the years as they waited for Clive to return. You can look at the grand cast to see what Torgal's thinking, and oh no, dude, no, come on. Don't give me that. I don't want to read that. At least Torgal doesn't die. You can go ahead and check doesthedogdie.com to confirm it. I was going to be in some trouble if that happened. There's a scene later with Torgal where he awakens to an ancient power. Torgal is a descendant of Fenrir, the royal hound of the previous dominant of Shiva. So he's like a dog dominant, and he gets superpowers for a fight, which was awesome. But they completely dropped this for the rest of the game. There are side quests you can do to learn more about the lore, but oh my god, man, not everything is about lore. I was expecting some new gameplay mechanics for him, but nothing changed at all. Big wasted potential here. You get more minor characters during this section as well, including Uncle Byron, another favorite of mine who gets to witness both of his nephews come back since assuming they were dead, and mid-update? Yeah, oh man, how long has it been since a mid-update? Sid fans are eating good with this game. Turns out he had a daughter and just never told you. She's a happy-go-lucky engineer who fits the Sid trope probably better than her father. She's got an Irish accent, and she adds a much-needed pop of fun to the rest of the Hideaways cast of sad old people. But she's repressing hard about what happened to her dad, and kinda refuses to talk or acknowledge it with anyone. Another problem for you to solve as new Sid. Clive is not quite better off in this deluxe hideaway as you might think. After everything that's happened, even bearers kind of hate him now. What he did caused them nothing but death and destruction. For all his efforts, he now faces the internal struggle, wondering if he's made the world worse. But he continues to try to make it better. For Sid. The rest of the game is about hunting down the Mother Crystals and killing the Empire. Lots of focus is on the Titan guy who's been seeking revenge on you for killing his Garuda girlfriend, but you chop his arms off. Not so surprising that Dion, the Bahamut dominant, eventually joins your team after your mom swore he would never rise to power and killed all his motivation for being evil. And for those people who complain that it doesn't make sense for dominants to be bossed around, here's the moment for you. He goes Bahamut mode and just starts blowing shit up. It's left to you and Joshua to take him down as you merge together to become Fifreet, or Ifnix. Dion is a really cool character, all things considered. He's just only around for the ending part of the game. It's kind of the problem with all the characters. They're here and then they're gone. And during Bahamut's destruction is when the brothers finally reunite with their mother. She's the one who slits her own throat, who I mentioned a while back. Kind of disappointing. She was the most hateful monster, and I wish they got to at least exchange a few more words with each other before it happened. Maybe they didn't want Clive to kill her because he's supposed to be the hero, I don't know. Isn't this what the M rating is for? Would anyone really complain if he just torched her or something? You're making the dark adult Final Fantasy go crazier. And by now in the story you can figure out that Ultima is manipulating things. The child that Clive's mom had with the King of Sandbreak somehow was part of Ultima. It was all a plan to get Dion angry, have to fight Clive, so Clive can absorb his powers. He's priming Clive to be the perfect vessel for all the dominants, but we still don't know why. What I was wondering the whole time was, how are we gonna get those Shiva powers? Because I was assuming for a bit that it required the dominant to die. That's what happened with the first 3 icons we absorbed. I mean, we thought we killed Phoenix and we got Phoenix. We did kill Garuda and we got Garuda. And then our friend died and we got Ramu from him. So I thought it was connected to death. And I figured, okay, we're gonna get Shiva. That means Jill is gonna die. But that's apparently not how it works. So let's talk a little more about the most controversial 16 character, Jill. After breaking free from her chains, she's much more hardened than the girl we knew from childhood. She joins Clive on his journey, but is mainly motivated by her own quest for revenge on the ones who imprisoned her. She tags along because she knows we're hitting all the Mother Crystals anyway, and when we're on the way to the region where she was enslaved, she comes out of her shell and confesses her desire to kill. We get to see her more unhinged, angry side. And we do it. She gets her revenge, kills the guy, and ends that arc. This is the awkward part. She has literally nothing to do now for the rest of the story. She basically just becomes a simp for Clive, and her only motivation is helping him be a hero. There's a little bit of Mikasa from Attack on Titan in her. The simp arc ends after the two of them end up stranded on a beach following a big battle. She just offers the powers to him because he needs them more or something, and then they have sex on the beach. And there's this very weird, suggestive visual of a fireplace coated in ice. That just is gross. And from that point on, she doesn't join you on any more main quests. I don't know, the whole thing kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Like, if this is the character you wanted to write, then fine, I guess. But it comes across like they had no idea what to do with her after she got her revenge. She's the only woman in the main cast, and she's an accessory for the big man to use, pretty much. Really doesn't sound good when you put it like that. At least Joshua yells at him for it later, always trying to do everything himself and not needing friends. Interesting decision to make brotherhood a central theme of the story when the last one, So Clive seems to knowingly fall into Ultima's trap by absorbing all the icons, and his attitude is like, who cares, I'm just gonna kill him anyway. So the boys go in to do so, and Ultima dumps his whole backstory onto you. Ultima actually is an alien from a race of magical beings who showed up here in a space arc. They are magical, but magic is a non-renewable resource, and using it saps the aether from the planet and eventually covered theirs in blight, which is the same issue that has been plaguing Valisthea for the whole game. In ancient times, the Ultimas created the Mother Crystals as siphoning devices to store this planet's aether, and they created humans to serve the one who will become powerful enough to raise the new world from the ashes of this one, destroying all of humanity in order to begin a brand new world for the aliens, and that chosen one is Clive. But as always, humans had ideas of their own and began using the magic for themselves. After the final battle, the Ultima hive mind becomes one, including the one absorbed by Joshua and slowly killing him from years ago. This is the final nail in the coffin, literally, for Joshua, as he dies for real this time and passes on Phoenix to Clive. And then you go Fee-Freet Rage mode to finish Ultima off, declaring he's nothing more than a coward, afraid of the humans he created someday passing him, and they did. He says some stupid line like, "Your fantasy is final," or something. I gotta find the clip.
The world you seek is but a fantasy!
The only fantasy here is yours. And we shall be its final witness.
And now that Clive has learned the power of letting others help you, he destroys Ultima and his giant spaceship. The world is safe, all magic is eradicated from the planet, and everyone's an equal again. That is, until humanity comes up with another reason not to be. In a post-credits scene taking place far in the future, two brothers are playing outside around, pretending to have magic powers, and their mom is like, "Oh, you guys don't know magic is only in fairy tales." And it pans over to a book called Final Fantasy by Joshua Rosefield. One last clap back to the haters. I like the ending. I like that we strayed away from realism and started fighting aliens out of nowhere. But I think this plot would have benefited a lot from Ultima's mysteries being solved earlier. There was no need for all this mystery just to answer it at the very end and fight. It's hard to even follow what he's going on about unless you consult the old lore books. So I didn't dislike the story, I disliked some parts of it. I thought it maybe was too lonely and had some real rough pacing issues due to filler quests and time skips. One character arc I was just not a fan of at all, and too much focus on lore. It's a cool world you got there, but it would be cooler if I could get interested in the story you're telling me before you ask me to study it in a library. but I appreciate the risks taken in Final Fantasy XVI. Jumping across multiple periods of time gives the story a real weight that it needs if it's gonna sell you on the end of the world. You aren't seeing things from the perspective of one group of heroes who for some reason are at the front of every problem that happens. You see problems develop on a global scale, especially if you do side quests, and no other mainline has a hub area full of characters with their own stories. I got excited whenever a new quest popped up involving one of my favorites. Seeing the series go for a dark and realistic style was also cool, just as a fan, wondering what that might look like. Oh, and Ben Starr is wonderful. I gotta mention Ben Starr. I wasn't sure if he was just memed or if he was the real deal, but he delivers such a realness to his lines, from the important conversations to getting hurt real bad in battle and going, fuck, in the same time and in the same manner as when I say it when I almost die in a hard fight. Speaking of hard fights, there isn't much of a post-game, because when you beat it, you unlock Final Fantasy Mode New Game Plus. You can start the game over with your same abilities, but on this playthrough you'll encounter late game enemies much earlier. There's new equipment to find, and battles require more strategy. I've heard if you were itching for more of a challenge like I was, New Game Plus is there to satisfy you. If I wasn't so busy and so ready to get into the next game, I absolutely would play it and probably go for the Platinum Trophy too. Hey, maybe I will when we're done here. That's it for the base game. So what does the DLC offer? We've somehow never really gotten traditional expansion-style DLC for a single-player mainline, so I was quite intrigued. 2 DLC expansions were released in December 2023 and April 2024. The first one is $10, and the second one is $20, or you can get them bundled for $25 with the expansion pass. Who knows how they'll charge you for this when it comes out on PC, but that'll be $95 for the complete edition. Pretty steep. Good news is I enjoyed both of these a lot. They feel like mini 14 expansions right down to the title card and font, but they don't build off the ending of 16. Both of these expansion quest lines are simultaneously unlocked right before the final stage of the game, which is also where the game spits you back out if you load a completed save, though they only appear if you do 2 specific quests for 2 main characters. Quickly enabling ATS to explain these quests. Go ahead and skip to Echoes of the Fallen if you don't want main story spoilers. One of these quests is for your girl Jill, and the other is for Joshua. Jill's quest is about surprising her with a field of flowers from her hometown in a very romantic sequence. They confess their love and they kiss. Oh, how sweet. Joshua's quest is about the discovery of your dad's will. After the betrayal, your mother took every possession in the castle and left you with nothing, but a lowly, loyal servant stole the armbands he was hoping to pass down to both of you someday and held on to them for years. The brothers receive the bands and visit their father's grave before the final battle. Both quests are meant to cement the bond between you and each of them, permanently adding them to your party for anything else you decide to do in the game. Except for the final battle, because Jill still doesn't come with you. Echoes of the Fallen is the first $10 DLC introducing a side story around the magic crystal economy. Crappy bootleg crystals are being sold and they don't yield much magic at all. They're rip-offs. So where are they coming from? Could it be another mother crystal? Not even Vivian knows about it. You get a lead on some bandits who are selling them, and after chasing them around the region, you finally get some real info out of them. They've been mining the crystals from a mysterious spire in Western Rosaria that is now filled with Akashic monsters. So before we get spoilery, I'll tell you what this DLC experience actually is. After the few story quests and cutscenes, this DLC is essentially one big dungeon stage. For $10, some may scoff at its length. It's only about 2 to 3 hours if you include the story preamble, but that stage is a great one, scattered with bosses and new enemy types that were fun on the level of S-rank hunts of the base game, and a truly epic final boss, probably the craziest fight in the complete package. If you agreed with me that the stages feel a lot like Final Fantasy XIV Dungeons, then I'd say this DLC feels a little bit more like a raid. And if you're unfamiliar with 14 terms, a raid is basically an even cooler and more difficult dungeon. Enemies were only 1 to 3 levels lower than I was doing all the side quests. Also worth noting that early on I equipped that accessory that boosted EXP gains by 15 and never took it off. I'm basically as powerful as you could possibly be at this point, and the DLC enemies still put up a fight. I was never sweating too hard, but I was trying. This is closer to the level of challenge I wanted in the main story. Oh, and there were some awesome accessories to equip. You know how they were mostly lame in the base game, just affecting your stats slightly or making a cooldown a few seconds faster? In this DLC, you earn a bunch of accessories that do some game-changing stuff. Like one of them raises the damage multiplier cap on staggered enemies from 1.5 to 2. One of them gives you a free limit break comeback if you lose all your health. Where were these abilities in the base game? Now that I have cool powered up items to play with, it makes me want to go for the new game plus even more. Those are all the big takeaways from this DLC. Pretty short, but it's ATS time. Skip ahead if you don't want this DLC spoiled. The dungeon itself feels very alien, but not in the Ultima way. The song playing in the background towards the top of the tower was familiar. I knew I heard the motif before. Isn't this Aziz La? Though it sticks closer in my mind as the Omega Raid theme from Stormblood. But with Omega fresh in my mind, I made it to the end of the stage and, surprise, I encountered him again. Omega gives you an insane laser blasting thrill ride of a fight, even more fun than the normal final boss. I died a couple times. So it turns out this spire was an artificial mother crystal created by the Fallen on a quest to be as powerful as the gods, but it must be destroyed all the same. The bandits we met tell us not to, but then we're like, no dude, we have to, and then they're like, okay. And we all learn a lesson about with great power comes great responsibility or something. Echoes of the Fallen, fun time, I liked it. But what about the next DLC, The Rising Tide? It costs twice as much, so it must add a lot more, right? Well, it does. This expansion brings you a brand new region with its own story and culture as it's been cut off from the rest of the world. This means a bigger story, side quests, new hunts, new rewards, new enemies, a new town with new characters, and a new Eikon for you to absorb. We get word that Leviathan's dominant is in trouble, but he's been lost for at least a century. At the edge of this new land is a giant cascading wave frozen in time. One of the prettiest sights in the game, especially when you get up close and see the light reflecting off the tiny droplets of water. You get to explore a temple with water flowing through it and crumbled pieces stuck in midair. It's a strong contender for prettiest part of the game. You ever wonder what tonberries would look like in a realistic 4K setting? You'll wish you hadn't. My favorite type of DLC has always been the ones that give you a smaller, condensed version of the main game experience, and that is pretty much what this one is. You had 4 areas, here's a 5th one with a whole bunch of new stuff to do. You had 7 Eikons, here's an 8th one. Leviathan's special ability is literally a water shotgun. It's kind of awesome. You can shoot bursts at point blank range or shoot out these water grenades to get smaller groups. And there's a Gears of War active time reload. It's fun. I was a bit too attached and comfortable with my other setup, so after a while using Leviathan and his ultimate tsunami attack, I was drawn back into using Bahamut's big laser. You can't beat big laser. Everything is tougher here. Enemies were almost all a few levels above me, and the challenge I felt when I faced those first S-rank hunts finally came back. So once again, I did all the side quests. But did we really need another whole quest to unlock your chocobo again for this specific area? Just another odd 14 carryover. They also added collectibles to the new map area, things that actually give you a reason to explore. You'll hear the sound and feel the vibration when you're close by to one of these aquamarine crafting materials. They yield the same sort of cooldown reduction type accessories for the new Leviathan powers, so I wasn't really interested, but at least there's something else to do. They clearly put a lot of work into this DLC. I'm surprised they got it out as fast as they did. So, yeah, I'd recommend it. Both of these for $25 is pretty nice, and everything you unlock adds more to the replayability of the base game too. That's not even all. Finishing the story unlocks the Kairos Gate, which I thought was advertised as a roguelike mode, but it's really not, it's just a boss rush. Beat 20 stages in a row, same fights every time, and you can't equip accessories or weapons or anything. It's just a boss rush that strips you down and throws you all the way back to the start if you die. The real catch is there's no healing. No more leaning on potions. All of a sudden the game I thought wasn't challenging enough becomes extremely hard. You heal a little after each fight, but that's it. One really bad hit from a boss is going to sting for like the rest of the run. Using Limit Break becomes more about the regen effect rather than the damage effect. The part that's slightly roguelike is the enhancements and boons. You can spend points to buff your stats or scoring capabilities. I threw everything into HP and defense because I could barely survive without it. Boons are temporary buffs that might last a few floors in a row, so you need to think a bit more about what to spend them on and when to spend them. But truly, it's not that interesting. Nothing changes between runs and nothing happens when you beat it. I had a few okay attempts, but then I made it all the way to the final battle and died. Yeah, I'm good. That's where my Final Fantasy XVI journey came to an end. The Rising Tide is hiding a couple secrets, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but at the time of recording, it is the newest Final Fantasy product to release. So, if you haven't gotten around to it yet, make way for ATS. Starting with the Kairos Gate, since we were just talking about it. If you beat 20 levels in a row and receive an S rank on every one of those battles, you can fight a secret boss that I heard was kinda cool, but there's no way I'm doing that. The proper story is kinda interesting. It leads you to a little baby frozen in water. This is Leviathan's dominant. The sins of all his ancestors have been laid on him, and he was cursed with the burden of being the dominant. So the question on your mind at this point is probably like, if Ultima was making Clive the perfect vessel by having him absorb all the icons, why did he leave Leviathan out? Apparently, the answer is it's because he sees this baby as a blemish on his idea of a perfect vessel, because of all the sins or something. I don't know. This little baby didn't do nothing, man. So now, since this canonically takes place before the final boss, would Clive be tainted with this power when Ultima was trying to absorb him? I don't know. The main story doesn't change. The final boss is of course gonna be a big Eikon fight with Leviathan, and it might be the hardest fight in the main story of the game. I got stuck on him. Died a whole bunch. He kicked my ass, I can't lie. Once Leviathan is tamed though, we rescue the baby and return him home. There's a post-game. Like a bunch of side quests get unlocked after you beat it, and there's special hunts too, which were my favorite part of the game, so I was super happy about that. You can unlock the Tonberry Knife as a weapon, which does less damage, but a ton more stagger, making it probably still the best weapon in the game? I don't know, but it's the only weapon in the game that isn't an obvious direct upgrade. Better late than never, I guess. And doing all the side quests unlocks a final quest. It serves as a little epilogue for the whole thing. Clive steps in and helps perform this culture's equivalent of like a baptism for the Leviathan baby, finally welcoming him in after years of him being known as a cursed, sinful monster. The story is a little anticlimactic since it's all just a total tangent while the characters are supposed to be fighting the final boss, so the world doesn't end. You can choose to play both expansions before you touch the ending. That might be better story-wise, even if it kills the pacing, but you will kick Ultima's ass with overpowered gear. Oh, speaking of Ultima, the biggest surprise was that you unlock Ultima. You get 2 new icons in the rising tide. Ultima's special ability puts Clive into a levitating godlike stance and makes all his attacks giant sweeping die moves. And his cooldowns recharge crazy fast. How dare they give me all this after I beat everything? That New Game Plus is really calling out to me now. I feel bad for the people who rushed through the New Game Plus to like get the trophy before the DLC came out, because it must be so much more fun with all this new stuff you got now. So I think I will go back. I think I will check out New Game Plus one day down the line. I'll return to you, Clive, that we might one day look upon the moon again together. At the start of this review, I was trying to piece together what everybody was angry about with this game. I was like, I had a great time with this. But then I went through and reviewed the experience, dissected it as I said we would, and I ended up finding what some would consider kind of major flaws in every system and design choice in the game. There's no meaningful character growth. The fights are fun and flashy, but they're all kind of the same. They blend together and they're not unique. There's no party. Everyone kind of exists to serve Clive. They have arcs of their own, but most wrap up in like the first half of the story and then they're left like doing nothing for the rest of it. They just like follow Clive around like a dog. The world feels anti-exploration and the plot has some serious sluggish pacing issues. And these 2 points stem from sharing the same dev team as the MMO. And that ended up being my biggest takeaway from this video personally. I don't know about you. Like, I was originally comparing them just for fun, but then I realized as we went on, like, it's kind of a legitimate complaint to say, I think you guys may have developed this game a little too much like it was a different genre than it is. You can even blame the problem with the combat system on 14. Like, think about it. In Final Fantasy XIV, there's teamwork. It's about the different roles playing together with each other. But what about solo missions? In every solo mission, you just spam your DPS move, and when your health gets a little low, you press heal. That's what all solo missions are in 14. And that's kind of how 16 plays with a few extra steps. Obviously, the combat is more entertaining than Final Fantasy XIV solo missions, and it makes it sound a lot worse when you put it like that, but I'm just trying to make a point. For all its flaws, I don't want to make it seem like I didn't enjoy Final Fantasy XVI, but it's just a hard game to sell you on. Usually at this point in the video, I'm like, alright, if you like this game, you might like this one. If you don't like this game, you might not like this game. But I brought up the games that it compares to. Modern God of War, Kingdom Hearts. I like those games so much more. I can't guarantee if you like those, you'll also like this. And usually with mainlines, not everybody loves them all equally, but you can usually see one thing that every mainline does that none of the others do. One thing that makes it stand out. And I tried to think about what that is for 16, and I don't know. What does 16 have that the others don't? Active time lore? I guess you can say this is the first, like, fully real-time action battle system. But that's only if you don't count 15, which is understandable because there was, like, barely a system in that. People hated 15 too. That had objectively more concrete problems. Yet I think I felt more positive about that game at the end of that video. But in so many ways, 16 is the antithesis of 15. Both good and bad. It's more put together, it's more complete, it all makes a lot more sense. But it doesn't quite have the same heart and soul as 15. That's one of the great things about Final Fantasy is you can always find something good even in the games that aren't quite your thing. We can take these last two main lines and put them side by side as objectively as we can, and we can conclude 16 is the better made game. Just like, I don't know how you argue the opposite. 16 is more well designed. It just is. But if anyone told me yeah, but I like 15 way more, I would completely understand. Some people get really mad when you say positive things about 15. Like, you're a fraud. You can't say that game's good with all the crazy problems it had on launch and how much they had to fix and how much they canceled and all. The whole thing was just a mess. But like, it's been 6 months since I finished that game and I still think of the good times I had with it. 16 is so much more of a AAA prestige PS5 game that kinda goes through the motions. There's nothing immediately bad to say about it. There's nothing so obvious, but it doesn't stand out as particularly special either. It's like a Horizon Zero Dawn. Like, yeah, oh yeah, I had some good times. There were some good fights, there were some great moments. Nothing bad to say. It's a good game. It's good. But even though it's already been a whole year since 16 came out, it's still too early to say if it stands the test of time, or if it doesn't leave an impression or something. We have to take more time and think about it in the past, maybe in the context of a 17, which is so long away. But mostly, we gotta let this come out to PC. Unlike 15, which released on both consoles, had years of add-ons and years of DLC, practically took people's Final Fantasy attention for an entire generation. 16 just came out on one console in an era where more and more people, more and more companies are giving up on exclusives. Waited to see if sales were good before starting on DLC, got 2 DLCs out, and then Square was immediately like, okay, we're gonna aggressively approach multi-platform now. Also, gotta say it, eventually, it was extremely overshadowed by just a couple months later, the next installment of the Final Fantasy franchise that became bigger than Final Fantasy. But the PC crowd, all those MMO players, are gonna get their hands on it soon enough. Maybe the popular opinion is gonna start to sway once it grows a bigger fan base. Maybe it'll even come out on the Switch too. Well, I don't know about that. You can look at every mainline Final Fantasy as a pin in the active time lore history that is Final Fantasy. 16 will no doubt influence 17, regardless of who directs it or how different it is. But we know absolutely nothing about it. We don't even know if it's in development yet. It's gonna be a long time. A lot of shakeups are happening in this company right now. A lot of shakeups are happening in every video game company right now. I legit have no idea what to predict for the next generation of consoles, of companies, of what games are gonna look like. Is the balloon just gonna keep growing, or is it gonna pop? I don't know. I hope it's not as grim as the news is making it out to be lately. But there are 2 things I can predict. 2 things that are constants in this life. Live service games and Final Fantasy VII. Shit.
A sky of scattered tears, 1,000 years apart.